May Yahweh's blessings be upon each and every one of you this evening. We're continuing here in the 15th Book of Yisrayl, Righteousness Prevails, and we're actually covering the last sermon for this year, for the year 2015, and then there is one more after this one, which is a great classic, Food of Spirit Holy. A special presentation there at the end of this book from 12/21/96. So look forward to that special presentation there as we finish up the 15th Book of Yisrayl. But tonight we're going to be covering chapter 40. And the title here is When the Beast Falls Behind, She Gets Desperate. Nuclear war will be the finish. And you can kind of see from the title there that, these... When the beast's there, when she sees she's kind of lacking, you're going to see her try to push things into effect and take these desperate steps in trying to get ahead. But we know that the all-out end result is going to be nuclear war. And I'd like to begin on page 430. If you have your books, page 430, and on verse 2 here, Pastor says, I'd like to put you on high alert. Now, if you remember, there was something in the news there, and this was at a time when, of course, the so-called terrorist attacks taking place. They really haven't diminished any, but as you'll see from the news articles that we cover here this evening in this sermon, that they're calling for this heightened awareness and the vigilance of all the people and more security and more force being out there. And that's what was shown in the news prior to Pastor here taking the podium to speak. He said, I'd like to put you on high alert. Now, the government's putting everybody on high alert. I'd like to put you on high alert and tell you to start watching this news. I'm going to repeat some of that because I don't think the people caught it. I can say it much better than that character can and show you how it ties into the Holy Scriptures. And that's really the key for those of you who might not realize the whole reason we watch the news on Sabbath is to see how it relates to Bible prophecy and that prophecy being fulfilled. So Pastor's going to explain to us a little bit about what we saw. Now, in verse 3, we've got a new thing coming out in the Prophetic Word magazine. It's called the Bread Sack. Watch for it. And these people do so great in writing these. And then he shows us a picture on the camera, and I have one of them here. Can you see that? The bread bag there. So you see the bread bag, and the scripture on this particular one, complete my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being united in one accord of one mind. And, the thing about these, the bread bag and, the sayings that are written on them, and Pastor has shared that with us, these things are, they're uplifting and they're encouraging. And it makes me think of the scripture that encourages us to encourage one another. We're all going through the tests and the trials and the pressure, and, it's increasing. So try to have that encouraging word for one another, throughout the day, and have something that, always have something there that you can say to a brother to lift them up, to encourage them. And that's what I think of when I see the bread sack there and the sayings that are written on there. Okay, if you look over to verse 5, but I want you to know that man makes plans to destroy his enemies. Now, that's what they're telling you. They've got to make plans to destroy their enemies. And right now, according to most of the way the world is taking it, they're the Muslims or those who wear veils. And remember, the pastor has taught us quite extensively how Malachi Martin wrote in the book, The Keys of This Blood, and he revealed that anybody who didn't worship Mother Mary, which Yeremiah called the Queen of Heaven, would suffer. And that suffering would be this attack. It would be an attack on remember Daniel said, on any form of holiness, which the way that some of the things that the Muslims do, and in fact, the veil itself, how they cover, how the women cover them, there's a couple different styles. whether it's a full face or, half the face or so forth, but it's a form of holiness, and this is being attacked. And, that group of people, as we see continuing here, especially this time at the end of 2015, going into 2016, was a time when there was a lot of attacks on the Muslim people here in the United States and really across the world, because how they were being blamed for certain things. And I'll show you an article, but it was saying how the attacks, the hate crimes is what they call them, against the Muslim communities was really skyrocketing at that time. But remember that this was made known, that these attacks were going to be there, that these people would suffer. And as far as the those who wear the veils, there's quite a few countries now that have banned, or they have a full ban or a partial ban on the face veil. And it's actually the individual can be subject to pretty hefty fines by refusing to take the veil off. So it's showing that it's a direct attack against the form of holiness, and that's what Pastor is going to explain to us here. But there's several countries, a lot of them over there in the European area there, Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands. They all have bans or partial bans, on the face veil. Well, right now we see the government, in verse 6, the governments, we see the Vatican is making plans to destroy the earth. Now, they're never going to come out and say we're making plans to destroy the earth. They're going to have these, some of their speakers, like Paul Ehrlich was one of them, that said, we need to depopulate the earth by like 6 billion people. And, they won't come out and tell you how they intend to do it. And they're not going to say that we're making plans to destroy the earth, but they're all pushing the depopulation, this depopulation theory. They claim they're making plans to protect the people from climate change. Well, they haven't read our book, or maybe they read it and just rejected it. But there is more and more scientific proof coming out all the time showing that microorganisms are sick in heaven. And this is the reason they're not cleaning the heavens and the reason for disasters. And these are the ones that, remember, our high priest Yeshua spoke about in Matthew 24, that you're going to see all these things increase. They're not supposed to be to this extent. The world likes that phrase, the natural disasters, but they're very unnatural. Yahweh didn't intend it to be to that type of force and magnitude that we're seeing. Well, this is the reason they're not cleaning the heavens and the reasons they're not cleaning the heavens and the reason for disasters. But the real cause of global warming, it's in our book, The Birth of the Nuclear Baby, and also in the Free Prophetic Word magazine that has that as well. Okay, verse 7. All the earthquakes. I never heard of an earthquake in Oklahoma, and now they had 800 and something last year. 850 of them in Oklahoma. I've never heard one of them. I lived there for several years. I was born and raised there. There was no such thing. And I want to show you this chart here. This kind of shows how these earthquakes have taken place. If you can see this here. Now this is from the USGS, confirms Oklahoma quakes are due to, okay, they of course they blame it on the fracking, which is it's a certain part of it where they inject the wastewater down into the ground, and that's what's causing all the shifting. But if you notice, look how it starts off, how there is hardly anything, and then you reach up here to 2010, and it just spikes up to in the thousands there of recorded earthquakes. So this again, you see how mankind is. When they seek to change the way Yahweh has something done, there's always these consequences, and that's just one example. But as Pastor said, he lived there all those years and never experienced them. And now people they're saying that Oklahoma as Tornado Alley. Now they're calling it Earthquake Alley, because of all the earthquakes that they keep having. Okay, in verse 8, they started taking peace from the earth. Now this is a very important statement right here, and this comes from Revelation chapter 6. And if you have your Book of Yahweh with you, I'd encourage you to turn over there to Revelation chapter 6. I've covered that in Revelation chapter 6. Yahweh showed that the Vatican gave the orders. She gave authority to one of the quartet to take peace from the earth. And we see this, and the earth is not peaceful at this time by any means. And we can see this in Revelation. If you turn there to Revelation chapter 6, if you look at verse 4, and there went out another horse that was red. Of course, and the red, Pastor explained, refers to the blood. Okay, so you already keyed in on the fact that this has to do with the death that is coming. And power was granted to him who sat upon it to take peace from the earth. Okay, so they were given that authority. It was allowed to be given to them. Remember, it has to be, Yahweh has to allow these things, but it was allowed that they be able to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. And remember, that great sword is they're actually the greatest armies and the greatest weapons that mankind has ever developed, and we know that's in our lifetime here, but that's what this great sword is. And if you want to turn over to Revelation chapter 13 and verse 13, you see another, you could tie this right into Revelation 6 verse 4, and he does great wonders. Well, the same thing there, the great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And that again is these nuclear bombs that they have that will bring down this fire. Okay, so back in verse 8 here, so she gave authority to one of the quartet to take peace from the earth. Well, that started. It's already started. That's why the wars are going on, and he tells you where, in and around the great river Euphrates. In that fourth part of the earth, it tells you, well, how did they know it was going to be there? Why not in America? Well, they find ways to make their actions seem necessary and righteous. And that's a very key point right there, that they find these ways to make their actions look like it's very necessary, and it's a very positive thing that they're doing here. And one example is something that we've seen in the news recently with this the sarin gas attack. Remember, they said that they accused President Assad of gassing his own people using that sarin gas, and because of that, the United States went in there and bombed this airport and so forth. But they never did the investigation. They refused to allow that to be investigated. But it was done, and it's just one example of so many. But it seems like, okay, well, see what he did. Now we're going to have to go in there. We can't just stand by here and do nothing while he gasses his people. Which is ridiculous, to even think, something like that. But that's the reasoning here, and it's just an example on how they make their actions seem necessary, and that it seems like we just have to do this, okay? And that's going to tie into another part here in what Pastor talks about, that is that they're putting plans in to do here in the United States. Okay, for certain, for kind of the same reasons here. All right, well, that's what the Vatican is putting forth right now. That's what the Pope has been visiting all these people for, and saying they're committing suicide if they don't follow the Vatican in this way and save the earth. Okay, let's look down at verse 10. Now, that's what we're seeing right now coming forth from the Vatican. Okay, verse 12. They don't want us to be able to preach Yahweh's plan of salvation, nor warn the world of what it's getting into, but we are. And we're going to see here that, there was a reason Yahweh chose the United States okay, to allow the house of Yahweh to be established, because in some countries you don't have this ability of freedom of speech and freedom of the peaceful assembly and so forth. And, that's what Pastor's going to go into here. But Yahweh allowed it. He allowed it. He knew that that the house of Yahweh would have to broadcast this message, and we would need to be able to operate under that protection, so to speak. Yahweh is our ultimate protection, but that's the way that Yahweh does it. He allows the house of Yahweh to be protected. Well, we are doing that right now. They're wanting to stop it and make a law to where they can legally stop it, according to the Vatican, the supreme judge of the whole world now. The only ones they're not in judgment of is the house of Yahweh, and we have a judge named Yeshua over the house of Yahweh. And he says that the gates of hell will not prevail against his house this time. But let me read you something here on this, on the First Amendment, because there's a couple key points here, and we're going to see, because Pastor's going to go into an example here where they talked to some students at Yale University, and most of them were ready to just give up this the First Amendment. So let me read you just kind of a brief summary of what the First Amendment allows or guarantees. The First Amendment guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, assembly, and the right to petition. It forbids Congress from both promoting one religion over others and also restricting an individual's religious practices. It guarantees freedom of expression by prohibiting Congress from restricting the press or the rights of individuals to speak freely. It also guarantees the right of citizens to assemble peacefully or peaceably and to petition their government. Okay, and then I could read you the amendment itself, the First Amendment there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. So, that was, as you look at it, everything that's done, you'll see that the moves that the Vatican makes, it's to target or try to stop the house of Yahweh from doing their job. Okay, but Yahweh has put things in order to protect the house of Yahweh. Well, in verse 13 here it says, "Nation in shock as Yale students." Okay, and here's an example. So turn the page and we'll read the rest of this article right here, verse 15. "Nation in shock as Yale students enthusiastically sign petition to completely eliminate the First Amendment. When activist filmmaker Ami Horowitz visited the Yale campus to see how many students would sign a demand to eliminate the entire First Amendment, he was shocked to find that they gladly supported the idea." And why did they support it? Because they were being pushed in that direction to do so. But you see that would be a target there. That would be something that would target what the house of Yahweh is doing if that was taken away. You see how the Vatican could kind of work that in there and try to, let's take this away, and then we could come against the house of Yahweh for them preaching this message. Well, why? Because they were told to do so by the Pope, by the Vatican, the leader of the kings of this earth. I'm going to prove that to you before this sermon is out, because we can see it vividly now in what is taking place. Okay, so let's look over here at let's look at verse 18, and here's an example. That Pastor uses regarding the Israelis and the Palestinians, and how you can see how he's explained that. In fact, it's playing on the radio. How you can quickly. It was so easy to get into an argument over there or start a fuss, just because of the situation and how tense it is. But he says in verse 18 here, "Well, you'll never have peace when you're stealing. You can never steal and have peace in doing so. that in itself would put two people against one another. You can't steal from someone and never think you're going to have peace. It's impossible. When you take something that doesn't belong to you, it creates hatred and it creates war and bitterness. And remember, we can steal a lot more than just something physical. Okay, the peaceful solution, we can steal a reputation, we can steal time, we can steal the rights of ownership, all different sorts of things here. But that stealing creates war and bitterness between people. And that's the way of Cain and the way of Satan, the devil. All right, so keep that point in your mind. And let's talk about now this First Amendment again, as Pastor continues here in verse 19. The First Amendment means freedom of religion. That's one thing. We would never be able to be here right now in any other country. No other country would allow what the United States was set up by Yahweh to do, and that is to take the message of Yahweh to all nations. In fact, other nations, some of them have limited rights of freedom of speech, but there are some where it's completely against their rules to speak freely. And if you do, you face a prison, fines, all these type of things, depending on how their rules are set up in their particular country. But again, Yahweh allowed this. He did this so that the message of Yahweh could go forth. So freedom of religion is one of the amendments, the First Amendment. Freedom of speech is another part in the First Amendment. Freedom of peaceful assembly is another. Yes, they've got laws against assembling in other nations, other states. Freedom to petition the government is another one. All those things are in the First Amendment, and they want to wipe it out. Okay, so you see how that would be targeting, how Daniel said, they want to make war against any form of holiness, if they could do that. All right, well, let's look at, turn over to page 433, and let's look at verse 22. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. The bulletin warns of new phase of terrorist threats. The Department of Homeland Security on Wednesday issued a bulletin warning the public that the Islamic State, okay, so here again is that target against, or that, coming against the Muslims. You see where they put the hatred? Since then, the hatred, the assaults against the Muslims in the United States have tripled since they put this out. This is the hatred that they are stirring up. And I want to read you another article here. Hate crimes against Muslims in U.S. continue to rise in 2016. Now remember, this was right at the end of 2015. So going into 2016, all this was, the Islamic State and all that, created nonsense there that made people hate anyone that practiced Islam or the Muslims in any way. Well, this is from Human Rights Watch. It says, researchers at California State University analyzing data across 20 states reported 196 incidents of hate crimes against Muslims in the U.S. in 2015. Okay? A 78% increase over the prior year. So, and these people are not bad. There's no reason to hate these people. But yet everybody takes it out, or what they see, this hatred that's generated by the actions of a few, they take it out against the whole group of them, so to speak. So a 78% increase over the prior year, while hate crimes against almost all other groups declined or increased much less. So they either went down or just increased a little bit. Projecting these figures nationally, they estimated that about 260 hate crimes against Muslims in 2015. Those figures were later corroborated by FBI data showing 257 assaults, attacks on mosques, or other hate crimes against Muslims for 2015, a rise of about 67% over 2014. So you see, it was just as Pastor said there, it's tripled. It's tripled. It's gone up, and they're targeting this hatred against these people. And in verse 23 here, Well, remember Malachi Martin said in his book, The Keys of This Blood, also in the interviews with the Vatican, he said Mary, Uremia said, Queen of Heaven, Satan, the devil, is going to make war against all of those who will not worship her. So, anyone that doesn't want to worship the Queen of Heaven, Mother Mary, as they call her, is going to suffer this. That's what they're doing here. That's the plans of the Vatican. Daniel said they're going to try to destroy every form of holiness. That translated the holy people, but it actually means every form of holiness. And those people have a form of holiness. In what they do, in certain things, they have a form of holiness, and they're being targeted, including the wearing of the veil. Right away, they start putting hatred in the minds of the people for anyone who wants to wear the veil or the hijab. I think that's what it's called. Okay, so let's continue here. So in the next couple verses, the article that Pastor is reading here is all showing how they want to increase all the security for these possible threats. And they're talking about setting up checkpoints, checking baggage, and this is here in the United States as well. And let's pick up on verse, let me see. Okay, well, verse 30 talks about more of the communities here that, that they want to, that they're going to have, they're worried about, and, surrounding the Muslims. Let's see. Let's go to verse 37 here as we get close to wrapping up. Let's go to verse 37. Now, this is not a request to be righteous and all work in unity like Yahweh says we're going to do in His kingdom. Okay, and I want to put this in your mind here, in our minds, about the unity. If you're not in unity, you won't be there. And he puts that down rather strictly and firmly, and then shows you examples of what non-unity brought all throughout the Holy Scriptures. But this is going to be forced. What the governments are planning on doing with this very strict laws and the strict force that they want to start implementing now, because they're saying, hey, we think these possible threats are coming and we need to protect you, so we need to start checking all your stuff and baggage, and we're going to set up these checkpoints. So they're forcing this there, and it's an agenda. Okay, it's an agenda. All this is being done for a reason. Well, if you look down to verse 40 here, let's look all the way at the bottom here, and this is kind of the bottom line. The outcome is not going to be peace, brethren. It's not going to be peace. Okay? They say they have to do this. Remember, when the beast falls behind, she's going to do desperate things. But it's not going to bring peace. The outcome is going to get worse and worse, and there will be more revolutions. Okay? And that's really what it's about. It's going to continue to get worse. They're going to say they're doing this to bring about peace. We're not going to see it get better. It's only going to get worse. But in verse 43, this is not to bring peace. It's not to protect anyone. It's to do exactly what Malachi Martin said the Vatican had planned to do, to make war against all who will not accept Queen Mary, the Queen of Heaven. She's going to make war, and she started that war shortly after that, if you remember. All right, may Yahweh bless all of you. If you would all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to one of Yahweh's great priests, the great Khan Kifa. God bless you.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to be continuing on this topic here. Remember that unity. It's all about unity, and we're going to look at it from a different light in the second portion of this sermon that we're going over, beginning on page 436. In Revelation 10, I'm reading from verse 51. Revelation 10 says, I believe it is Revelation 10:7 that says, but in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, or the messenger, when he will begin to sound, this great secret of Yahweh would be finished, as he's declared to his servants the prophets. Well, I come and I'll show you these things, and he who judges this great whore sits, that means judges this world. In verse 52, now that's what the Vatican is doing right now. It has got all the world, the complete world is in unity with the Vatican. But of course, it's not a unity like Yahweh is. Yahweh is a unity, and His house is in unity with Him. The world is not in complete unity with each other, but they have come to agree in rejection of Yahweh's law. They've got them to in this agreement, in this unity, that, this is what Revelations is showing here, is that the Scriptures say this too. In Revelations 12, that the first few verses, it says that all the world is going to worship Him. Yes, all the world is going to worship Him. Well, this proves it right there. 196. If you remember that climate meeting in Paris, 196 nations had agreed to live by these rules that they laid down. Now this is total. The total world right there is saying, yes, we're going to follow you. But remember, Pastor pointed out what this actually was long before it ever took place. When they first started talking about it, he was on to it. Like from the very beginning, the very first time I even heard this climate deal mentioned, he got up just, as quickly as it was mentioned and let us know this is a plan of depopulation. This has nothing to do with saving the environment. This is, like the great Khan before me was just mentioning, it's a planned agenda. And you have to remember that. In verse 53, he says, yes, in Revelation 17:2, with whom the kings of this earth have committed fornication, they've practiced idolatry. Now, that's God worship. That is, they've practiced sin. Okay, they've practiced the sin, and they've declared that they don't want to be, in unity with Yahweh. They've practiced God worship, the evil of the gods, as Genesis 3:5 shows. Now, if we jump down to verse 56. He says, when they destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, when they destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, they thought that they would wipe out the Sabbath keepers. This has always been Satan's plan from the beginning. Remember, we got to get rid of Abel. Abel's a problem. Whenever there's somebody representing Yahweh, that is a problem to them, and they think that if they just get rid of that problem, well, they can all go about the living a normal life, one that's not exposed. But the duty of the work of Yahweh, the duty of the house of Yahweh in these last days is to expose these things. And of course, that is one of the things that I kind of alluded to at the beginning, the light. We were called to be a light to this world. Now, when you go in the Scriptures and you look up that word light, it's all over the place. But you need a working knowledge of what that means in order to understand what exactly is being said there. Because the only way we're going to be a light to the world is if we're in unity with Yahweh. Otherwise, we're just going to be more darkness, because the darkness is rebellion. Remember that's in your side note there in Genesis 1, that rebellion that was there in the beginning. That was this darkness, right? So if we're in unity with Yahweh, we are walking in the light of Yahweh. That is the light that we're going to get into a little bit more in this sermon. I'm a little bit jumping ahead, but it's a very great topic to just go back and research and look at all these Scriptures, and it gives you a really full understanding of what it is that's being said here. But in verse 56, when they destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, they thought that they'd wiped out all the Sabbath keepers. Well, all the people who would keep the feasts of Yahweh, Yeshua told his disciples, when you see them encompassing Jerusalem, then get out of there. And here's your obedience. Here's your obedience and where it pays off. It's very important. We have lots of scriptural examples of warnings being given, and people either took those warnings seriously or didn't. But you could see the result, based on what then took place with those people. Well, these people were wise, and of course they had a work to do, and Yahweh had spared them for this work. This is why this warning was given. And that's what Pastor's saying right here. He said, which they did. They had a work to do, so Yahweh saved them until their work was done. And we're reading from their work right here. Right here, the so-called New Testament, or the second part of the Book of Yahweh. Well, there were other people besides them who escaped, history says, but the ones that they killed, they murdered, were the ones who kept the Sabbath day. Now remember that what pastors taught us also, what took place in Germany in the 1930s. It was the same thing, and it wasn't just in Germany. You can go through all of Europe and even into parts of Russia. All over the world at that time, there was a movement towards anybody who was keeping the Sabbath. You remember in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan was at its largest during that time. So there was a great movement that Satan stirred the minds of the people at that time. Why? Because she knew of a work. She knew of a work, and her plan was to destroy it. And over all these years, you would think, surely by now she would have learned. She can't. No, she doesn't learn. She can't learn. The wicked can't understand this. They always seem to think that they're going to find some kind of loophole around it and outsmart Yahweh. And as stupid as that sounds, this is what we see repeated throughout history. Right? So in these last days, the seventh Malach, the House of Yahweh, has warned the world of what's going to take place. We are privy to that information. Don't ever count that as an insignificant thing, that we understand the times that we're living in, because the world doesn't. The only bit of light that they're receiving is coming forth from this house, because the rest of the world is in darkness, as we'll see here in a little bit. But in verse 59, he says, this woman was drunk with the blood of the saints. And I think we left something out there, but here it is. He said in verse 7, that the Malach said to me, why are you astonished? I will tell you the mystery. See, this is a secret that I'm going to tell you. It's a secret. Remember what we just read there in Revelation 10:7, that the great secret of Yahweh, when the seventh Malach speaks, the great secret of Yahweh would be revealed. It's Yahweh who reveals the secrets. And he's shown this power throughout history. You remember, in the book of Daniel, reading about this. You remember this in Yosef, in his time when he was in Egypt. And I think he said those exact words. Well, I can't do it, but there's a Father in heaven who can reveal these things. So these are the great secrets of Yahweh that are being revealed and from his house. And of course, that is the light. That is the light shining from heaven. And the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads. Okay, so in verse 60, well, he tells you again, look down to verse 9, and here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains, and the word means hills, but you can look it up in Strong's, where the woman sits. How many cities sit on 7 hills? Okay, then you have to say, well, how many of those cities that sit on 7 hills have this authority over all the earth, over all the kings of the earth? And has, there's no way of getting around who is being spoken of here. There's no legitimate way to say, no, that's not me. It is. That's very clear. Yahweh is very clear in identifying this city that sits on 7 hills, and what they're going to be doing in this time period. Now in verse 61, he says, go to verse 18, because it shows you the city, and he says, look at the woman whom you saw, that great city which reigns over all the kings of the earth. Remember that 196 nations that agreed to support the divining serpent. And yes, this was a Vatican thing. This was, from the very beginning, pushed very strongly by the Vatican. Not only pushed, it was created there. The Vatican uses the UN to get their... it's almost inseparable when you start to look at the two. But they use them as this white horse, as the Revelation shows it. They look righteous. They look like they're there to help, but they only help in situations where they benefit from. No one's stepping into Yemen to stop all the killings that are going on there. No one's stepping into any place to stop any killings that don't fit their agenda. Well, in verse 63 he says, and after these things I saw a Malach come down from heaven. That is the authority. The authority comes down from heaven that guides and inspires. And of course, Pastor went over this very thoroughly in that Making a Connection with Yahweh series, that how this takes place. Having great authority, and the earth was enlightened with His glory. Okay, so the earth is being enlightened. Brethren, by what we're doing right now, we're the only ones who are bringing light. You are the light of the world, and that's what Yeshua said. Now, let's go ahead and turn the page over to 438. Remember that we are the light of this world. In verse 68, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people." Of course, and Pastor goes into a little bit of a story here, talking about the press releases and everything. But this is what's taking place. The warning is going out to the world, and there's a gathering taking place. And Yahweh is saying, "Come out of her, my people." Right? If you have your Books of Yahweh with you, just if we can go to page 903 and 2 Corinthians 4 and kind of clarify this a little bit, because you could see this showdown taking place. You can see what's being played out right now. And like I said, the scriptures are so accurate, so very accurate. There's no reason that we should be in doubt of anything. But in 2 Corinthians 4:4, he says, For the gods of this world, remember we just read about that. They're evil. They practice sin, led by Satan, have blinded the minds of those who do not believe. And that is why the light of the message that's coming forth from the house of Yahweh, who is the image of Yahweh, the light of the glory of the Messiah, who is in the image of Yahweh, should not shine upon them. Okay, they don't get it. None of the wicked will understand. And we'll hopefully get into the next two verses here in a little bit. But keep that in mind. That's what we're seeing played out in the world right now. This blinding of the minds. They've made it to where evil looks righteous and righteousness looks evil. And they've done a great job. Satan has done a very great job with this. And they're very forceful in their teaching. They're not allowing people to make choices. They're coming in and saying, "No, you have to accept this. We have to have this evil preached in every school. We have to have it taught in every nation. Otherwise, you're going to suffer." And that's exactly what we see taking place. Well, in the bottom of verse 68 here, he says, "Come out of her, my people, Yahweh's people. If you want righteousness, you won't find it in the churches or the religions out there. Not that they're warring. The religions themselves are warring. The only place that you'll find it's in the house of Yahweh. I saw a few months ago, I guess it was about a month ago or so, they had a meeting in Washington, D.C., where they'd called together the leaders of all these different Christian religions around the world to talk about the persecution, that was going on. And that was their solutions to it. We need to step in there militarily, and take action. And everybody agreed to that. That's their solution. To every problem, there's a bomb for that, We've made the biggest and best bombs to solve all the problems in the world. That's as idiotic as that sounds, that's their approach to everything. It's always militarily and never through negotiation. We never ask anybody, well, what is it that we can do to resolve this problem? It's always either something to do with force, like sanctions, or a military, type solution, which of course is never a solution. It always adds to more military conflict. But in verse 76, he says, "Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, this great city Babylon." Now, of course, what's being shown here is how this Vatican, in all of its wisdom, with this great plan that they've put together, which Yahweh knew that they were going to put together before the creation of the earth, how it backfires. He says, do you remember what that man said in the news a few minutes ago about the 1 hour? Well, read it again in just a moment, or we'll read it again in just a moment. For 1 hour, your judgment, that is the fulfillment of the prophecy of 1 hour, has come. And you could see the merchants, this is what it's always about, the merchants, the getting rich, the sales, but they're standing far off and weeping and saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. For in 1 hour such great riches. Look at that. Look at verse 19 now. And they cast dust upon their head, and they cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships in the sea were made rich through their wealth. Well, in verse 80, we see she is made desolate. She is made desolate. So remember, this is the abomination that makes desolate becomes desolate herself. This is the plan of depopulation that they have backfires upon themselves. That 1 hour, that means destruction. 1 hour, her destruction has come. 1 hour destroyed in 1 hour. Now, he goes through some news articles here proving that is capable right now. With the technology we have and what the world has created, they can actually destroy the planet in 1 hour. So now in verse 86, he says, now listen to the rest of this. So the world could be basically finished off in anywhere from a half hour to an hour, he says. How in the world could Yahweh know such a thing? Well, that is the great wisdom of Yahweh. Yahweh reveals these secrets. He is in full control. And like I said, we can't ever take that for granted. I know there's so many distractions in life, and so many things that we can get caught in. But it's very important that we always have that perspective, that we maintain that in the forefront of our mind, understanding the plan of Yahweh. Because this is what we're here for. This is what we're working for. This is what we do day in, day out. We tend to think in our mind that I remember when I first came to the House of Yahweh that, it was going to be some kind of quick, spectacular event of changing. I was this way, and when I came here, I was just going to be different all of a sudden. And it takes time, and it takes hard work, and it takes effort. Yes, Yahweh blesses our effort every step of the way, especially when we ask Him. Especially when we cry out and we're longing for this, and we show Him through our actions that we desire to be a part of this kingdom. He will bless our efforts every step of the way. Now, but what we learn here is exclusive to this place. It's not something that the world has any understanding about. They have bits and pieces, you could say, but the bits and pieces get smaller and smaller. If you really look at them, they have nothing. They have nothing except for what they vaguely repeat that came from the house of Yahweh. All these Christian preachers, if they preach any truth whatsoever, it's because it came from the Book of Yahweh or the house of Yahweh. Now, understand, they don't have any truth on their own. They're a bunch of, dogs, as the scriptures, point them out to be, or pigs that, they wash and they go back in the mud. Well, in verse 86, he shows us that Yahweh's great wisdom, He foretold that this was going to take place. Now, in verse 87, he says, 1 hour and the world could be finished off upon the arrival of these warheads. 1 hour, just like in Revelations 18 says. Now, in verse 91, he says, well, here in 2 Kepha now, but the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night. A thief in the night. So the thief in the night does not proclaim his coming, obviously. They rely on the night to give them cover. They're quiet. They try to make no noises, not arouse anything. to go in and get what they want. Right? That's how the thief in the night works. Now, Yahweh said there's no reason why you should be overtaken with it as a thief. You get that? You get the difference? We've been warned. We've been warned continuously that this should not be any surprise. What they're doing should not be any surprise to us. He's been telling us every moment of our existence here in the house of Yahweh, we've been warned of this. And it's coming. And he says, he said that because, notice that, because you are children of light. You know these things. You know where you're supposed to be. The protected place is no other place except for the house of Yahweh, the protected place. You remember, in Daniel, where he says, those who are wise, they will shine like the stars of heaven. Those who teach people, those who bring people to righteousness, those who are teachers. And that's why it's so important, as the sign says, that we need to be learning what to teach so that we can teach what we've learned. Because if we're not teaching what we've learned, we're teaching darkness. We're not teachers of light. We have to get that in our mind. Not one little bit, one little strain this way or the other, or one little thing that comes forth from the house of Yahweh that we might decide for ourselves that this is not important. This doesn't apply to me. I accept this and that, but I don't accept this. We can't be like that. We have to be in unity. We have to be in unity with Yahweh. And when we are in unity, which is what this color represents here, the purple. This is that pure people that are in pure unity with Yahweh. And this is what we're striving for. And of course, we're given opportunity day after day, minute after minute to prove these things. Well, these things, he says, these things we're supposed to be the protected place, and there's no other place except for the house of Yahweh, the protected place. Now, in verse, if you go back to 2 Corinthians 4, and then look at verse 5, he says, notice, for we do not preach ourselves, but Yeshua, Messiah, our ruler. Okay, so you remember what Yeshua said, that I know my judgment is just because it's not mine. I judge as I see it based upon the wisdom that Yahweh has given to him in the scriptures, in the written word of Yahweh. Okay, so that's how we put down ourselves. We do not preach ourselves, but Yeshua Messiah, our ruler. Like the sign says, we learn what to teach, and then we teach what we've learned. In verse 6, he says, for Yahweh, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh in the face of Messiah. Remember, all this about the sun and the moon and how the reflection, the reflection of perfection. The light of the moon is actually the reflection of the light of the sun. And it actually shows the Yahweh, it shows Yeshua, it shows our overseer. It shows this last day's work. This is really a miraculous thing. When we look at it, we understand the work that's taking place right now. Remember, the 7 lamps were there to light the way to the most holy place. Okay, so we're the 7th work, the 7th lamp on that lampstand. Since all these things will be dissolved, I'm reading in verse 95 here. It says in verse 11, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and righteousness? Okay, so we've established that we know these things. We know what's coming about. So knowing why we're here, what manner of person should we be? Well, number one, you should be in unity with me. This is what Pastor's saying. You should be in unity with me and Yeshua. Okay? That is the only way that we're going to be light bringers and children of the light. With Yeshua, with Yahweh. I'm not going to tell you anything, not anything that would be out of unity with Yeshua or Yahweh. But I will disclose this Bible to you, the Scriptures, the Book of Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. That is what the witness Israel has been doing for us. Now he is asking us, he's been asking us, he's been pleading with us, take hold of it. Take hold of it and do it yourself. Become like this man. Become like this example that we see here, not willing to teach any little thing that is out of unity with Yeshua, with Yahweh, with Pastor. All right? And when we do that, then we'll establish it. People will know the heavens and earth. The heavens are open right now to see our actions. So we're on trial right now. We have to remember that. Now in verse 103, he says, "But grow in truth and knowledge of Yahweh." Grow in truth and knowledge of Yahweh. I would say when you get a free moment, don't think about getting on wheels and going running around. Get the Books of Yisrayl, the Book of Yahweh, the newsletters. Fill your mind with knowledge and wisdom, and pray that Yahweh makes you love it. And if you do that, I'm reading in verse 103, if you do that, He can. And you'll fall in love with it if you'll just practice what I tell you. You can't help but to fall in love with the study of the Scriptures if you actually do it. There's a million distractions that you can make for yourself, and Satan's got them all over the place. That's what we read there in Corinthians 4:4. That's what's blinding the minds of all these people, all these various distractions, right? Well, Pastor gave me a great example in a sermon when he said, he had that Book of Yahweh on the dash of his vehicle, and he'd pull it off, and when he was stopped, he'd read it for a little while or whatever, and then put it back when he had a free moment. Little things like that. Time management. We all say that we're busy. Oh, I can't do this. I have to, we have time. Trust me, we have time. But what we do with that time, we need to get our heads in these books, because that parable of the foolish virgins there who didn't stock up on the oil while it was available. That's for us. That's for us. And like we've been rehearsing, we're without an excuse. It's not like this should take anybody by surprise. What? I didn't know this was coming. Well, why not? It's been preached for 40 years here. So in verse, we're going to need to kind of speed up here. Let's go ahead and go to verse 109 on page 442. Now, this is the warning to the world that Pastor gives. And of course, this warning goes out from the House of Yahweh. I can tell you everything that's in a religion. He says, I can tell you everyone that's in a religion out there in the world that's practicing war, you're not going to be saved out of this. Now, see, this is what they're telling the people, that there's going to be, this is some kind of holy war now that they're building up for. This is, we're going to be on the right side of history killing these people here, Pastor's telling them, you're not going to be saved out of this. Yahweh doesn't want you to go to war. This is all the teachings of the gods. All the gods of the world, they all want war. What's going to take place? You're going to have to come out of war. You're going to have to put your swords away. You're going to have to stop doubling up your fist to the people and wanting to hit them. And don't go to karate either. It's the same. It's a bunch of crazy, idiotic stuff that the world is teaching you. And they teach it through the movies, through the schools. They have their recruiting officers there waiting on the children when they finish high school. And even if they don't finish high school, they want them anyway. It makes no difference how dumb they are. They want them to serve in their armies. And they're getting those together to protect. And he says, I put this into quotations, protect, because it's the actual opposite of protection. I saw something on Rome not too long ago, and they were saying that Rome was quite like the wars of the United States, how they launched wars, because they did so with the idea that these are preemptive. We're going to solve the problem with these barbarians by going and conquering their land, because they're hostile people there, of course, and they don't know how to govern themselves. So Rome was kind enough to go over there and kill the people for them and put them under Roman subjection. And that, you know, the historian that was doing the speaking, he was saying, well, it's not too much different than what we're doing today. They would have really seen eye to eye, you know, this idiotic mentality that you can stop war by going and killing the people before they start the war. Well, it makes no difference how dumb they are. They want them to serve in their armies. And they're getting those together to protect. And that's quoted, to protect you. It's not a protection. It's a depopulation that's going to take place. But it's going to get out of hand. And that's what the Scriptures show. This is what Yahweh has shown us. All right, so we don't have to fear these things here. What we have to do is remember what type of person we ought to be.